They say one mistake can change everything. I just didn't know mine would hit me like a thunderclap. The rain was relentless, hammering the cracked pavement outside the narrow alley where I crouched, clutching the note that had slipped from my fingers moments ago. Emily Carter, 26, freelance journalist, usually careful, usually invisible, and tonight, reckless. The neon sign above the diner flickered, casting intermittent light across the wet asphalt, reflecting the puddles like shattered mirrors. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat a reminder that I had been seen, and seen by the one person who made the city pause when he entered a room. Derek Blackwell, a man whose name carried weight in whispers, whose presence alone could bend the behavior of anyone foolish enough to cross him. I froze as his silhouette materialized under the glow of a street lamp, shoulders broad, suit impeccable despite the rain, hair dark and slicked back, eyes piercing with an intensity that seemed to scan my soul. My fingers clenched the damp paper, the words smudged from the rain, a secret meant for the wrong hands, and I knew instantly they had found the right ones. The alley smelled of wet asphalt and coffee from the diner behind me, mingling with the faint hint of leather and something sharper, cleaner, emanating from him. He didn't move immediately, just stood, letting the distance between us stretch taut with unspoken command. My instincts screamed to run, but my legs refused, rooted by a cocktail of fear and fascination. Every instinct I had honed as a journalist, every skill for disappearing unnoticed, betrayed me now. Derek's voice, low, deliberate, carried over the rain. Did you think this would stay hidden? The words landed in my chest like stones, and my throat tightened. I wanted to deny it, laugh it off, tell him it was an accident, but no sound came out. His gaze didn't waver, did not soften, did not flinch. He stepped closer, each movement precise, deliberate, like a predator calculating, but contained, controlled. The puddles rippled as he approached, and I could see the reflection of his face, icy blue eyes, sharp jaw, faint scar just above the brow reflected alongside mine in the rainwater. My hand shook as I lifted it, half to shield myself, half to gesture helplessly at the note. The wet paper whispered between my fingers, a betrayal, a confession, a challenge I had never intended to deliver. Derek reached out slowly, not touching, just measuring, waiting for me to acknowledge him. The street around us seemed to blur, city sounds muted beneath the hammering rain and the weight of his presence. I swallowed hard, tasting metal from my nerves, and the first tremor of understanding coursed through me. This encounter was no accident, this note no trivial mistake. It had set into motion something vast, inescapable, and I was at its center. He finally spoke again, closer now, voice slicing through the storm. This changes everything. And in that instant, the alley shrank, the rain became a backdrop to the rhythm of our proximity, and I realized that nothing in my careful life had prepared me for what would unfold next. Every thought scattered like leaves in a gale, I could think of nothing but the pull of those commanding eyes and the undeniable truth that my ordinary world had collided violently, irrevocably, with his extraordinary one. The note trembled in my hand, the rain plastered my hair to my face, and I was painfully aware of the fine line between chaos and control, fear and fascination. Derek Blackwell was here, and everything had changed in the time it took for a single paper to fall. The rain had eased into a steady drizzle, leaving the street glistening with reflections of neon signs and the dim glow of overhead lamps. Emily Carter clutched the note tighter, her fingers trembling as she glanced around the alleyway, realizing just how exposed she was. Derek Blackwell had not moved, his figure a composed silhouette against the wet concrete, his gaze unwavering. Each step he took toward her was measured, deliberate, the echo of his polished shoes mixing with the soft patter of rain. The air between them was thick with tension, a quiet storm more electric than the weather itself. Emily tried to focus on the mundane, her breathing, the cold metal of the note, but each attempt failed as the weight of his presence pressed on her chest. Derek reached into the inner pocket of his coat, producing a small device, not a weapon, but something that carried authority in its simplicity. He tapped it lightly against his palm, eyes never leaving hers, and in that instant, Emily understood that he was not a man to negotiate in ordinary terms. Her pulse quickened, a drumbeat against the fragile stillness of the alley, as he spoke softly, his voice low but commanding, "You need to trust that I know what I am doing." The words were simple, yet the gravity behind them made her knees weak. She wanted to ask why, to demand answers, but the sound of her own voice seemed inadequate. Derek stepped closer still, bridging the few feet that had separated them, and she noticed the subtle way his eyes softened, just enough to hint at understanding, without diminishing the authority that radiated from him. Emily's mind raced through possibilities, each scenario more improbable than the last, yet none could erase the certainty that she was now entwined in something far beyond a typical night in Manhattan. A taxi splashed through a puddle nearby, the sound startling in the quiet, but neither of them flinched. The city around them blurred, the usual hum of traffic and distant conversations fading into insignificance. Derek tilted the note slightly, allowing the dim light to catch the edges, and he observed her reaction carefully, measuring, gauging, calculating the next move. Emily swallowed hard, tasting rain and adrenaline, and for the first time, she realized she had no choice but to follow, not because she wanted to, but because the alternative was unknown, potentially perilous, and entirely outside her control. The alley stretched longer than it should have, but she took a cautious step forward, then another, testing her balance and resolve. Derek mirrored her pace, close enough that she could feel the slight warmth emanating from him through the thin fabric of her coat, a subtle reassurance in the midst of chaos. As they emerged from the shadows into the glimmering streetlight, Emily could see the outline of a sleek black sedan waiting unobtrusively at the corner. Derek gestured toward it, not a question, but a statement of intent. She hesitated, eyes flicking from the vehicle to him, the note crumpled slightly in her hand, and then, with a deep breath that steadied her trembling, she stepped forward. The doors of the car opened before she could reach, as if anticipating her decision, and Derek held out a hand, not demanding, but inviting, a silent promise of guidance through a world she had not yet begun to comprehend. Emily took his hand, her grip tentative at first, then firmer as the realization sank in, she was no longer merely an observer in her own life. The city sprawled before them, rain-slicked and luminous, and every reflection on the pavement seemed to echo the new reality she had just stepped into, a reality dictated by Derek Blackwell, where every choice carried weight, and every moment could change everything. The sleek black sedan glided through the wet streets of Manhattan, its tires whispering against the glistening asphalt as Emily Carter sat silently beside Derek Blackwell, her fingers still gripping the crumpled note. The rain had faded into a fine mist, leaving a cool dampness in the air that clung to her hair and coat. She watched the city lights ripple across the puddles, each reflection distorted like the uncertainty that now filled her mind. Derek kept his eyes on the road, expression unreadable but commanding, hands steady at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Every so often, his gaze flicked toward her, calculating, assessing, weighing her reactions without a word. Emily felt a mixture of apprehension and reluctant curiosity, the kind that prickled the back of her neck and quickened her pulse. She tried to organize her thoughts, to understand why a simple note had led to this, why the ordinary streets she knew so well had suddenly become the setting for something extraordinary. The sedan turned smoothly onto a quieter street lined with brownstones, the sound of dripping water and distant car horns forming a rhythm around them. Derek's voice cut through the haze of her thoughts, calm but imbued with authority. "You cannot undo what is started tonight. Every action has consequences, and some are far beyond control." Emily swallowed hard, the words resonating in a way that made her chest tighten. She wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, but she knew that any inquiry might be met with silence or something far heavier. Derek did not release the intensity of his attention, yet there was a subtle reassurance in his presence, a quiet insistence that, while the situation was serious, she was not entirely alone. Her mind flicked back to the note, to the message she had meant to keep hidden, and the realization that Derek's knowledge of it had altered the dynamics of her world irrevocably. The car slowed as they approached a nondescript building, its exterior unassuming, yet something about it felt calculated, precise, like a place prepared for particular encounters and not chance visitors. Derek parked with exactitude, the engine's hum fading into the misty night, and turned slightly to look at her, blue eyes steady, holding the weight of expectation without pressure. "Stay close," he said softly, a command wrapped in protection, and Emily nodded, the coolness of the night doing little to temper the warmth of anticipation creeping through her nerves. She followed him out of the car, the damp air clinging to her, boots clicking on the slick sidewalk, heart hammering in a rhythm that matched the city around them. Derek opened the door with a precision that suggested a practiced familiarity, his movements smooth, controlled, and Emily stepped inside, noting the subtle change in atmosphere. The interior was warm, lit with soft lights, and a faint scent of polished wood and coffee lingered. Derek moved ahead, confident, unhurried, and Emily followed, each step reinforcing the surreal sense that she had entered a new world, one governed by rules she did not yet understand, where every glance, every gesture, every heartbeat mattered. She kept her hand lightly on the note, a tangible reminder of the path that had brought her here, and in the quiet, with only the distant hum of the city beyond the walls, she realized that tonight was the beginning of something neither ordinary nor easily forgotten, a night where trust, attention, and vigilance would be tested as she moved deeper into a story far larger than herself, guided by the man whose authority had reshaped her world in the space of a single encounter. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the heating system, a quiet background that made every small sound feel amplified. Emily Carter stepped carefully, her boots making soft clicks against the polished wooden floor as she followed Derek Blackwell through the hallway. The space was impeccably organized, modern yet understated, with walls adorned by abstract paintings that caught the low light in unpredictable ways. Her eyes darted around, absorbing details, the subtle texture of the carpet, the faint aroma of coffee mingling with cedarwood, the precision of the furniture placement. Derek moved with a calm confidence, hands occasionally brushing lightly against the edge of a table, as if testing the environment for safety and order, his gaze forward but aware of her presence. Emily felt a strange mixture of apprehension and curiosity, the tension from the alley still lingering in her chest, replaced now by a cautious fascination with the space and the man guiding her through it. They stopped before a large window overlooking the city skyline, the lights of Manhattan stretching endlessly, a mosaic of color and movement reflected in the glass. Derek glanced at her, eyes sharp yet measured, and nodded slightly as if giving permission to take in the view, an unspoken acknowledgement that she was beginning to understand the weight of what she had stumbled into. The note in her hand was crumpled, its message still clear in her mind, a key to the unexpected chain of events that had brought her here. She tucked it carefully into her coat pocket, realizing that its significance was growing beyond what she had originally intended. Derek turned away from the window and led her down another corridor, the floor beneath their feet quiet, almost reverent in its stillness. He stopped before a door with a polished metal handle, his hand pausing just above it as he studied her expression, gauging her readiness. Emily hesitated, feeling the anticipation build, her breath shallow and quickening. Derek spoke softly, his voice carrying a weight that was firm without being harsh. What happens inside may change your understanding of the world you thought you knew. She nodded, acknowledging both the warning and the invitation, and reached for the handle. As the door opened, a warm light spilled into the hallway, casting long, soft shadows that danced across the walls. The room revealed itself gradually, a space that balanced comfort and authority, with plush seating, muted colors, and subtle details that suggested careful thought rather than ostentation. Derek gestured toward a chair by the window, and Emily moved toward it, heart still racing, her hands now steadying as she settled in. He stood nearby, close enough that she could sense his presence fully, yet distant enough to give her space to acclimate. The air carried a mixture of anticipation and quiet control, each moment stretching with unspoken questions and latent possibilities. Emily allowed herself a measured breath, feeling the tension ease just enough to observe, to listen, to begin to consider that the night had shifted from chaos to a structured uncertainty, one where trust, observation, and careful movement would be as important as the choices she had made to arrive here. Derek's eyes met hers again, steady, focused, and in that look was a challenge and an offer, the first real thread of understanding in a night that had begun with an accident, a note, and a rain-slicked alley. Every detail of the room, every measured sound, every subtle movement carried meaning, and Emily realized that she was no longer merely following, she was participating, and every moment ahead would be influenced by the awareness she brought to it, guided by the man who had changed everything simply by noticing. Emily Carter shifted slightly in the chair, the smooth leather cool against her palms, as she tried to steady her racing heart. Derek Blackwell remained standing, just a few feet away, his posture relaxed but commanding, every line of his body radiating confidence and control. The room was quiet except for the soft tick of a clock on the wall and the distant hum of city traffic beyond the large windows, a calm contrast to the whirlwind that had carried her here. She studied him, noting the meticulous way he arranged objects on the side table, the subtle precision in every movement, and realized that nothing about him was accidental. Every gesture, every glance, was calculated, deliberate, yet there was an unspoken awareness, a hint of consideration beneath the authority. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of the note in her coat pocket, the damp paper now a symbol of choices made and consequences unfolding. Derek finally spoke, voice low and steady, carrying weight without raising volume. You must understand that the decisions you make now will ripple outward, far beyond this room. Emily nodded, swallowing hard, feeling the truth of his words resonate through her. She had thought the note was a simple act, a momentary lapse, but it had set into motion a chain of events that neither of them could ignore. Derek moved to the window, hands resting lightly on the frame, and gestured toward the city lights. "Everything you see out there," he said, "is a network of actions and reactions. Some visible, some hidden. And now, you are part of it." Emily's mind raced, images of the alley, the rain, the note, all blending together into a tapestry of consequence she could not untangle. She took a cautious breath, eyes following his movement, noticing the way the reflection of light danced across the polished floor, highlighting small details she had not seen before. Derek turned to face her, expression softened just slightly, enough to suggest a path forward, a hint of guidance without relinquishing control. He extended a hand toward a small table where a single cup of coffee steamed quietly, the aroma rich and grounding. "Sit," he said simply, an invitation laced with authority. Emily obeyed, settling into a chair, hands folded neatly in her lap, trying to center herself. The warmth of the room, the soft lighting, and the subtle scents created a contrast to the storm of her thoughts, a buffer against the chaos that had led her here. Derek sat across from her, eyes locking with hers, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. No words were exchanged, yet an understanding passed. Silently, a recognition that the night had irrevocably altered the trajectory of her life. Emily's chest rose and fell steadily as she processed the enormity of the situation, realizing that the next steps, every choice she would make, would be guided not only by circumstance but by the awareness that she was now entangled in a story larger than herself. Derek's gaze remained unwavering, steady, a silent command to observe, to consider, to engage with the world in a way she had never done before. The city beyond the windows pulsed faintly in the background, its lights reflecting in her eyes as she drew in a measured breath, feeling the weight of consequence and possibility intertwine, preparing herself for the unfolding path that Derek Blackwell had drawn them both onto, a path defined by observation, awareness, and the careful navigation of choices yet to be made. Emily Carter leaned back slightly in the chair, feeling the subtle warmth from the coffee cup she held between her hands, letting the aroma ground her racing thoughts. The room remained calm, a sanctuary of measured light and deliberate quiet, with walls lined in deep neutral tones and a faint hint of polished wood that added depth to the space. Derek Blackwell paced slowly near the window, gaze fixed on the cityscape stretching endlessly beyond the glass, his posture commanding but not imposing, a tension in the quiet that suggested anticipation rather than urgency. Emily followed his movement with her eyes, noting the subtle shift of muscles in his jaw, the precise tilt of his shoulders, and the way the faint light caught the edges of his coat, highlighting careful details in its tailoring. Her mind circled the note in her pocket, thinking of its implications and the ripple effect it had caused, understanding that every small action tonight had already set events in motion that could not be reversed. Derek turned, his eyes meeting hers with a steady intensity that conveyed both expectation and silent evaluation, and Emily felt the familiar prickle of tension combined with an odd sense of reassurance, a signal that she was seen but not judged. The clock on the wall ticked quietly, each second marking the slow unraveling of her previous sense of order, and she felt herself drawn into the rhythm of the space, attuned to subtle movements, shifts in expression, and the weight of unspoken communication between them. She set the coffee cup down gently, allowing her hands a moment to rest while keeping her attention trained on him, aware that every glance, every pause, every gesture was laden with meaning. Derek's voice broke the silence, calm and controlled. "You will need to observe, to consider, and to act with awareness. What seems ordinary may hold significance, and decisions must be made with both care and attention." Emily nodded, absorbing the gravity of his words, feeling a pulse of determination mixed with the underlying anxiety that had been building since the alley. She shifted slightly, leaning forward to catch subtle details in his expression, noting the careful precision in the set of his eyes, the slight curve of his lips that suggested both patience and measured calculation. The city lights outside reflected in her eyes, shimmering across the polished floor, reminding her of the vastness of the world she had stepped into and the unforeseen depth of the night that had begun with a single note. Derek moved closer, adjusting a small stack of papers on the table with meticulous care, then paused, his attention returning to her, blue eyes steady, unwavering. Emily felt the weight of the moment settle, a balance of anticipation and trust, understanding that the path ahead required observation, patience, and the careful navigation of choices already set into motion. The hum of the city beyond the windows became a background rhythm, marking the passage of time and the unfolding of a story far larger than herself, where she was now a participant, guided by a man whose presence had transformed a single action into a pivotal turning point in their shared unfolding narrative. Emily Carter shifted her gaze from the polished floor to the faint glow of the city beyond the expansive windows, watching as headlights moved like scattered fireflies across the wet streets below. Derek Blackwell remained near the table, his posture relaxed yet exuding a quiet authority. Fingers lightly tracing the edge of the note she had tucked away earlier. The room seemed suspended in time, the soft hum of the heating system mingling with the distant murmur of traffic to create a rhythm that Emily felt in her chest, steadying her nerves even as anticipation built. She leaned forward slightly, hands clasped loosely, absorbing the subtleties of his movements, the way his eyes would flick briefly to a corner of the room before returning to her, a measured assessment that suggested both expectation and understanding. Her mind raced, connecting the events from the alley, the rain, and the note to the present, realizing that each small choice had set off consequences she could no longer untangle. Derek's voice broke the silence, low and deliberate. Observation is as important as action. You will learn to see more than the obvious, to understand the weight of every detail. Emily nodded, feeling a pulse of comprehension and tension intertwined, aware that the night had shifted her role from passive participant to active observer in a world she barely understood. She shifted her weight, the chair creaking softly, and studied the space around them, the precise arrangement of furniture, the subtle play of light and shadow on the walls, the faint scent of polished wood mixed with coffee, that all conveyed a sense of order and control she had not anticipated. Derek moved to the window, hands resting lightly on the frame, gaze fixed on the city, and Emily felt the pull of his presence, a magnetic mix of authority and subtle reassurance. She focused on the notes in her mind, the sequence of events, the lessons implicit in every detail Derek seemed to highlight without words, realizing that her attention and decisions were now part of a larger pattern she was only beginning to perceive. The light shifted as a passing car reflected across the polished floor, drawing her eyes to the interplay of shadow and illumination, a metaphor she could not ignore for the choices ahead. Derek finally turned, walking slowly toward her, each step precise, deliberate, measured. He gestured to the chair beside hers, indicating a space for discussion, for dialogue, for understanding. Emily adjusted herself, straightening her posture, heart steadying as she prepared to engage, to listen, and to absorb the subtle lessons embedded in the night's unfolding. The hum of the city beyond the window continued, a soft undertone to the measured silence between them, and Emily realized that every glance, every pause, every movement carried meaning, shaping her awareness and preparing her for the next steps in a night that had begun with a simple note and had grown into a complex dance of observation, decision, and understanding under the guidance of Derek Blackwell, a man whose presence defined both the environment and the possibilities contained within. Emily Carter took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the night settle over her like a fine mist, each inhale drawing in the cool air and each exhale carrying a trace of tension away. Derek Blackwell remained standing nearby, hands clasped lightly behind his back, his eyes scanning her with a quiet intensity that made her acutely aware of every shift in her own posture. The room, bathed in soft light from strategically placed lamps, felt simultaneously safe and charged, a delicate balance of control and expectation. Emily's gaze traveled from the polished floor to the walls lined with abstract art, noticing the subtle interplay of shadows cast by the low lighting, each shift in light revealing new angles, new perspectives, much like the situation she now faced. The note in her pocket seemed heavier, its message echoing in her mind, the consequences of its discovery stretching far beyond her initial comprehension. Derek moved deliberately toward the window, resting one hand lightly on the frame, the city lights casting angular reflections across his sharp features, blue eyes steady and unyielding. He spoke, voice calm yet layered with a weight that made her ears strain to catch the full measure. Tonight is a test of awareness and judgment. The world does not pause for hesitation, and neither can you. Emily nodded, her hands resting lightly in her lap, feeling the pulse of the city through the glass, an invisible rhythm that mirrored the tightening knot of anticipation in her chest. She shifted, leaning slightly forward to observe him more closely, noting the subtle movements of his fingers, the tilt of his head, the precise alignment of his posture, each detail a silent lesson in observation and decision. Derek glanced toward her, eyes piercing, unwavering, and in that brief meeting of gazes, she felt an understanding pass between them, a silent recognition of the shared responsibility now linking them. The hum of distant traffic and the faint drip of condensation from the window created a quiet background cadence, framing the moment as both intimate and vast, a private space within the larger, bustling city. Emily allowed herself a slow breath, noticing the way the light caught the edges of her hair, the fine details of the room, the subtle scent of cedarwood mingling with the lingering aroma of coffee. Derek moved slightly closer, not imposing, but present, a reminder of the stakes and the guidance he offered without words. She realized the night had evolved beyond a simple encounter, that each glance, each measured pause, each detail she observed would inform the choices she was about to make. Her heartbeat, steadying now, became a companion to the rhythm of observation Derek seemed to cultivate around them, a silent instruction to measure, to consider, to act with awareness. Emily's eyes returned to the cityscape, lights dancing on the wet streets below, and she understood that she had stepped into a narrative defined by precision, presence, and the unspoken authority of a man who had turned a single note into a pivot point in her life, and that every moment from here forward would demand attention, clarity, and courage under the careful watch of Derek Blackwell. Emily Carter rose slowly from the chair, the smooth leather warm beneath her palms, and followed Derek Blackwell toward the large window overlooking the city streets below. The rain had ceased entirely, leaving a reflective sheen on the pavement that mirrored the countless lights above, each a fragment of a world she had only just begun to comprehend. Derek's steps were measured, deliberate, carrying a rhythm that seemed to set the pace for the room itself, and Emily found herself attuned to it, each step a subtle guide to understanding the gravity of the moment. Her hands, now free of the coffee cup, hung loosely at her sides, and she felt the tension of anticipation coiling and uncoiling in her chest as she matched his pace. The air was cool, carrying a faint scent of cedarwood and polished floors, mingling with the distant hum of traffic to create a background that felt both expansive and intimate. Derek paused near the window, hands resting lightly on the frame, eyes sweeping the horizon with a quiet calculation, and Emily stood beside him, noting the subtle way the reflection of his face played across the glass, highlighting the sharpness of his jaw and the intensity of his gaze. He spoke, voice calm but deliberate, each word chosen to carry weight. "You are no longer merely an observer. Every choice, every glance, every detail you notice carries significance. Understand that, and you will navigate the path ahead with clarity." Emily nodded, feeling a surge of comprehension mixed with the residual thrill of uncertainty, aware that she was stepping into a new dimension of perception where observation was as important as action. The city beyond the window pulsed faintly, a rhythm of light and movement that mirrored the undercurrent of anticipation within the room. She studied the way Derek's eyes shifted briefly to the edges of the room, noting details she might have otherwise overlooked, the alignment of objects, the careful placement of light, the subtle textures that communicated order and intent. Her mind connected these observations to the events that had brought her here, the note, the alley, the rain, and she realized how a single moment could pivot an entire trajectory. Derek turned his gaze toward her, steady, unwavering, and she felt a quiet pressure, an invitation to match his focus, to internalize the lessons implicit in his presence without words. Emily inhaled deeply, grounding herself in the moment, feeling the tension of the night settle into a concentrated awareness, and she understood that the journey ahead required more than instinct. It required full attention, patience, and comprehension. The faint hum of the city was now an undertone to their shared presence, every distant sound a reminder of the world beyond the room, and yet the room itself felt like a controlled universe, a space designed to teach, to guide, to test her perception. Derek gestured toward the open view, a subtle nod to the responsibility now resting in her awareness, and Emily felt the weight of her position crystallize. Every reflection in the glass, every light in the distance, every nuance in the room was part of a network of details she could no longer ignore, and in that understanding, a calm focus settled over her. She straightened her shoulders, met Derek's piercing blue eyes, and felt a surge of determination, knowing that the night had brought her here for a reason, that every choice made from this moment forward would be informed by the clarity of observation, the precision of thought, and the steady guidance of Derek Blackwell, whose presence had transformed a single accidental note into an entire narrative that now encompassed both of their lives.